What if the perfect marriage was the perfect lie? Julian Vale, a self-made millionaire, had it all: a stunning home, a booming business, and a beautiful pregnant wife, Evelyn. But one rain-slick night, Evelyn vanishes without a trace. While the city holds its breath, Julian and his mistress Isabella raise a glass to a future finally free of obstacles. They think their secret is safe. They think they've committed the perfect crime. But they forgot about one thing: her diary. And the secrets scrawled inside are about to burn their perfect world to the ground. The Vale estate was a monument to new money, a sprawling contemporary mansion of glass and white stone perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. From the infinity pool which bled seamlessly into the horizon, you could watch pods of dolphins arching through the waves. Julian Vale loved the view. It was the view of a king, he often told himself, surveying his kingdom. And Evelyn, his wife of 5 years, was supposed to be his queen. Evelyn was beautiful, with the kind of understated elegance that made other women instantly insecure. She had been a librarian when they met a quiet, bookish woman who seemed an unlikely match for the brash, ambitious Julian. But he'd pursued her with the same single-minded intensity that he applied to his business deals, and she had been swept away by his charisma, his promises of a life she'd only read about in novels. Now 7 months pregnant with their first child, she found herself living in a gilded cage, the silence of the vast minimalist rooms amplifying the hollowness she felt inside. The pregnancy had been Julian's idea, another acquisition to complete the picture of his perfect life. He'd been ecstatic, throwing a lavish party where he announced the news to their friends. His friends really as if he'd single-handedly willed the child into existence. Evelyn had smiled until her cheeks ached, her hand resting on her burgeoning belly, a vessel for her husband's legacy. But lately a creeping unease had settled over her. Julian was more distant than ever, his phone perpetually glued to his hand, his business trips becoming more frequent and his explanations more vague. He'd come home late, the scent of a strange floral perfume clinging to his clothes, a scent that was definitely not hers. When she gently questioned him, he'd laughed it off, calling her paranoid, a side effect of the pregnancy hormones. He'd tilt her chin up, kiss her forehead, and tell her he loved her, his eyes as cold and empty as the glass walls of their home. The name of the perfume, Evelyn would discover, was Black Orchid, and the woman who wore it was Isabella Rossi. Isabella was everything Evelyn was not. A fiery, passionate artist with a wild mane of dark curls and a laugh that could fill a room. She was a rising star in the art world, her abstract canvases selling for astronomical prices. Julian had become her most devoted patron, a fact he didn't bother to hide. He flaunted his discovery of her hosting exclusive gallery viewings and introducing her to his circle of wealthy investors. He spoke of her talent with a reverence Evelyn had never heard him use for anything other than a stock portfolio. Evelyn had met Isabella only once at a charity gala. Julian had insisted she come despite her advancing pregnancy. He had guided her through the crowd, his hand a possessive brand on the small of her back, before depositing her at a table with the other wives. He then made a beeline for Isabella, who was holding court by the bar, a vision in a blood-red dress that clung to her every curve. Evelyn watched them all night, a knot of ice forming in her stomach. She saw the way Julian looked at her, the way he leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered something that made her throw her head back and laugh. It was a look of raw, unguarded desire, a look he hadn't given Evelyn in years. That night, Evelyn started a diary. It was a simple, leather-bound book she'd had since college, its pages once filled with literary quotes and dreams of traveling the world. Now it became her confidant, the silent keeper of her fears. October 12th. Julian was with her again tonight. He called it a last-minute meeting with an investor, but he came home smelling of turpentine and Black Orchid. He thinks I don't know. Or maybe he just doesn't care. He looks right through me these days as if I'm already a ghost. Sometimes I feel like one. October 25th. I saw her car today. A vintage red convertible. It was parked 2 blocks from Julian's downtown office, the one he claims he barely uses. I sat in my car for an hour watching the building, my heart pounding against my ribs. I felt like a fool, a pathetic pregnant fool. Why can't I just confront him? Because I'm afraid. Afraid of what he'll say, afraid of what he'll do, afraid of being alone. Her entries grew more desperate as the weeks went on. She documented the late-night calls, the flimsy alibis, the mounting credit card bills from boutique hotels and designer stores she'd never set foot in. She was building a case, though she didn't know for what. A divorce. He would crush her. Julian Vale did not lose. The breaking point came in early December. Julian announced he had to fly to Singapore for an urgent business trip. He'd be gone for a week. He kissed her goodbye at the door, a perfunctory peck on the cheek telling her to take care of herself and the little guy. The next day, scrolling through social media, a habit she'd picked up to fill the empty hours she saw it, a picture posted by one of Isabella's friends. It was a group shot taken on a sun-drenched beach. In the background, unmistakable against the turquoise water, was a man with Julian's profile, his arm draped possessively around Isabella's shoulders. The caption read, "Art Basel. Miami has been a dream, especially with these 2 lovebirds." The phone slipped from Evelyn's numb fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. Singapore. He had lied so easily, so carelessly. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. It wasn't just an affair. It was a whole other life. He was living a life that didn't include her or their unborn child. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The fear that had paralyzed her for months began to curdle into a cold, hard resolve. He wasn't just going to discard her. She wouldn't let him. She was more than a ghost in a glass house. She was Evelyn Reed Vale, and she had a secret of her own. She went to Julian's home office, a sleek, sterile room that she rarely entered. She knew the code to his personal safe. It was the date of his first major acquisition, a number he revered like a holy relic. Her hands trembled as she keyed it in. The heavy door swung open. Inside, amongst the stock certificates and property deeds, was a set of files he thought she knew nothing about. Files detailing offshore accounts, shell corporations, and a pattern of systematic fraud that had built the Vale empire on a foundation of lies. She had stumbled upon it by accident months ago, looking for an insurance policy. She hadn't understood the complex web of transactions at the time, but she knew it was illegal. She knew it was the kind of secret that could destroy him. And now she finally had a reason to use it. She spent the next 2 days meticulously photographing every document with her phone, her heart hammering with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. This was her leverage, her escape plan. Her final diary entry was written the night before Julian was due to return. December 8th. He comes home tomorrow. The lie about Singapore will be the first of many I will have to endure, but not for much longer. He thinks I am weak. He thinks I am a fool. He has no idea what I'm capable of. He's about to find out. This isn't just about the affair anymore. This is about survival. My babies and mine. I have a plan. I pray I'm strong enough to see it through. She closed the diary, tucked it into her oversized handbag, and went to bed. For the first time in a long time, she did not feel like a ghost. She felt like a storm gathering strength just beyond the horizon. And she was about to make landfall. The rain began just after dusk, a relentless driving downpour that lashed against the glass walls of the Vale mansion. It was the night of December 9th. Julian had been home for less than 6 hours. He'd breezed in with a bouquet of gilt flowers, white lilies, funereal and cloying, and a story about a deal that had gone so well in Singapore, he'd decided to celebrate with a quick detour to Miami on his way back. He didn't even have the decency to look her in the eye when he said it. Evelyn played her part, the dutiful, slightly dim wife. She smiled, thanked him for the flowers, and asked about his flight. She moved around the kitchen, preparing dinner, her body a slow, deliberate vessel of maternal calm, while inside her nerves were stretched taut as piano wire. Her handbag containing the diary and the damning evidence on her phone sat on the passenger seat of her car in the garage. Her plan was simple: confront him after dinner, use the evidence as a shield, and demand a quiet, generous divorce. She had already contacted a lawyer, a fierce woman who specialized in high-stakes divorces, and had a preliminary consultation scheduled for the following week. But dinner never happened. As she was pulling a roast from the oven, Julian came into the kitchen dressed to go out. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a new, obscenely expensive watch. The scent of his cologne, a sharp, citrusy fragrance, filled the air, mingling with the aroma of roasting rosemary. Change of plans. Ev, he said, not looking at her as he straightened his tie in the reflection of the stainless steel refrigerator. Something's come up at the office. A crisis. I have to go. A crisis? She asked, her voice flat. At 8 p.m. on a Saturday. He finally turned to her, his face a mask of annoyed impatience. Yes, a crisis. These things don't keep office hours. You know that. Don't wait up. He was going to her. To Isabella. The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. He couldn't even wait a single night. He was leaving his pregnant wife, who had just spent the afternoon cooking for him, to go and be with his mistress. The storm inside her broke. You're a liar, she said, her voice shaking with a rage that surprised them both. Julian froze his hand on the door. He turned slowly, a look of genuine shock on his face. Evelyn had never spoken to him like that before. What did you just say to me? I said you're a liar. She repeated, her voice stronger now. There's no crisis at the office. You're going to her. Don't insult my intelligence by denying it. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He dropped the pretense, his expression hardening into something cold and dangerous. So what if I am? What are you going to do about it? I'm going to leave you, Julian, she said, her chin high. And I'm going to take half of everything you have. And if you fight me, I will expose you for the criminal you are. He laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound. You're delusional. You have nothing. Oh, but I do, she said, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. I know all about the shell companies. I know about the offshore accounts. I know how you built this empire on a foundation of fraud. And I have proof. The color drained from his face. For the first time she saw fear in his eyes. Raw, primal fear. He took a step towards her, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You're bluffing. Am I? She taunted, emboldened by his reaction. Check your safe, Julian. I have it all. And it's not in this house. It's somewhere safe. Somewhere you'll never find it. It was a lie, of course. The proof was in her car. But he didn't know that. His face contorted with fury. He lunged at her, grabbing her by the arms, his fingers digging into her skin. You stupid bitch! He hissed, his face inches from hers. You have no idea what you've done. He shoved her hard. Evelyn stumbled backward, her swollen belly making her clumsy. Her heel caught on the edge of the kitchen rug and she went down, her head cracking against the sharp corner of the marble island with a sickening thud. The world went black. When Julian called Isabella an hour later, his voice was calm, almost eerily so. It's done, he said, standing over Evelyn's still form. She's gone. Gone. Isabella's voice was a breathless whisper on the other end of the line. What did you do? She had an accident, he said smoothly. She fell. Hit her head. I'm taking her out to the coast. She always loved the ocean. He didn't tell her that Evelyn had still been breathing when he'd wrapped her in a heavy-duty tarp from the garage. He didn't tell her about the chilling finality of the wait as he'd loaded her into the trunk of his car. He didn't tell her about the baby. Some details were best left unsaid. He drove for hours, heading north along the winding coastal highway, the rain a furious curtain against his windshield. He found a deserted stretch of cliff, a place where the rocks dropped 100 feet into the churning black water below. He worked quickly, efficiently, his movements precise and methodical. He was Julian Vale. He solved problems. When he returned to the city, it was nearly 3 a.m. He drove to Isabella's loft, a cavernous space in a converted warehouse, the air thick with the smell of oil paint and her black orchid perfume. She was waiting for him, pacing anxiously, a glass of whiskey in her hand. She flew into his arms, her body trembling. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Is she—" "She's gone," he repeated, stroking her hair. "No one will ever find her." He had parked Evelyn's car, the one with the handbag, on the passenger seat in a long-term parking garage at the airport, a red herring for the inevitable police investigation. He'd wiped it clean of his prints. He hadn't bothered to look inside the bag. In his panicked haste, it was an oversight, a tiny detail that he would come to regret. Isabella pulled back, her dark eyes searching his. "Are you sure?" "What if someone saw you?" "No one saw me," he said, his voice firm. "I was careful. In a few days I'll report her missing." A distraught husband worried about his unstable pregnant wife. "They'll search, of course. But they won't find anything." A slow smile spread across Isabella's face, a mixture of relief and exhilaration. She refilled her whiskey glass and poured one for him. "To freedom," she said, raising her glass. Julian clinked his glass against hers. "To freedom," he echoed the word, tasting like ashes in his mouth. They drank, the city lights twinkling below them, a silent audience to their unholy celebration. They were free. They were safe. They had gotten away with it. 2 days later, a suitably frantic Julian Vale walked into the 17th precinct of the LAPD and reported his pregnant wife, Evelyn Vale, missing. He wrung his hands, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion, as he told the desk sergeant that she had been depressed, acting erratically, and that he was worried sick. The case landed on the desk of Detective Miles Harding, and the game was about to change. Detective Miles Harding felt a familiar weariness settle into his bones as he drove his unremarkable sedan up the winding driveway of the Vale estate. The place didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress of wealth, a sterile monument of glass and white stone that seemed to reject the very cliffs it was built on. In his 30 years as a cop, Harding had learned that the bigger the house, the bigger the secrets. And this house was immense. He was met at the door by Julian Vale himself. The man was exactly what Harding had expected: tall, handsome, impeccably dressed in a somber gray cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Harding's monthly mortgage payment. He radiated an aura of controlled, sorrowful power. It was a performance, and Harding recognized it instantly. He'd seen it 100 times before. "Detective, thank you for coming so quickly," Julian said, his voice a carefully modulated baritone thick with rehearsed emotion. He shook Harding's hand, his grip firm, his eyes holding a look of practiced despair. "Mr. Vale," Harding said, his own voice a low grumble. "Why don't you walk me through it?" The tour was a masterclass in performative grief. Julian pointed out the significant empty spaces in the cavernous home. This was Evelyn's favorite reading nook, he'd say, gesturing to a sleek, uncomfortable-looking chaise lounge. A pristine hardback novel sat on a side table next to a half-finished cup of herbal tea. It was all a little too perfect, like a stage set. Harding noticed there were no personal photographs, no clutter of a life being lived, only curated art and expensive furniture. The air was cold, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and the cloying funereal scent of white lilies that stood stiffly in a giant vase in the entryway. "I just don't understand it," Julian said, pausing to rub his temples. "She was so excited about the baby. A little hormonal, maybe? Moody? But this? It's not like her to just run off." "When was the last time you saw her?" Mr. Vale Harding asked, his gaze sweeping the room, his mind cataloging the absences. "Saturday night," Julian answered smoothly. "I had to go into the office. A last-minute emergency with our Asian markets. I told her not to wait up. When I got home around 2, she was gone. Her car was gone. I figured she'd gone for a drive to clear her head. We'd had a small disagreement, nothing serious. And you didn't call us until this afternoon, Monday." Harding's question was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "That's nearly 36 hours. I didn't want to overreact," Julian said, the explanation coming a little too quickly. She's done this before, after an argument. Gone to stay with her sister for a night. I called her sister her friends. No one had heard from her. That's when I started to panic. I feel like such a fool for waiting." He let his voice break just enough to be convincing. Harding just nodded, his face impassive. Check alibi. Check friends. Check sister. Note the delay. The story was plausible on the surface, but it felt hollow. It was a story designed to be told to the police. The initial sweep of the house was fruitless. The forensic team, led by a meticulous veteran named Kowalski, found nothing. No signs of a struggle. No suicide note. No blood. The kitchen where Julian said they'd last spoken was the most troubling part. "It's clean," Kowalski told Harding, pulling off his latex gloves. "I mean professionally clean. There's a faint smell of bleach under the citrus cleaner. We can't find a single clear print on the countertops or appliances, not even Evelyn's. It's like the whole room has been scrubbed." A clean crime scene was always a loud alarm bell. It screamed of a cover-up. The only thing they found was a single long dark hair near the base of the marble kitchen island caught on the grout. It was too long and dark to be Julian's, and they bagged it a tiny solitary clue in a sea of sterile emptiness. The break came the following afternoon. A patrol unit running plates at LAX got a hit on Evelyn's silver Mercedes. It was parked on the 4th level of the sprawling concrete labyrinth of a long-term parking garage. The air in the garage was thick with the smell of exhaust and stale recycled air. Harding oversaw the forensic team as they descended on the vehicle. It too was clean. The steering wheel, the gear shift, the door handles all wiped down. The ticket on the dashboard was time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. Saturday night. Another dead end. The scene was perfectly set to suggest a woman fleeing her life, catching a plane to somewhere anywhere else. But Julian Vale, for all his meticulous planning, had made one colossal error in judgment. Hey Detective called a young sharp-eyed officer named Chen from the passenger side of the vehicle. "You're going to want to see this." There on the plush leather of the passenger seat, almost hidden in the gloom, was a large, expensive-looking leather handbag. It seemed impossible that someone in a panicked rush to flee would forget their purse. Harding's tired heart gave a solid thump against his ribs. This was it. This was the mistake. Back at the precinct, under the sterile glare of the lab lights, they carefully inventoried the bag's contents. It was a window into Evelyn's life, a wallet containing a few $100s in cash and a row of credit cards, a set of keys, a tube of expensive lipstick, a bottle of prenatal vitamins, a paperback novel, and then at the very bottom, wrapped in a protective plastic sleeve, was a simple leather-bound diary. Harding handled the diary as if it were a sacred artifact. He opened it carefully. The pages smelled faintly of old paper and a light floral perfume that he now associated with the ghost of Evelyn Vale. He started to read, and the carefully constructed facade of Julian Vale began to crumble into dust. He read for hours, ignoring the ringing phones and the chatter of the squad room. He read about Evelyn's crushing loneliness, her growing fear of her husband, her methodical documentation of his lies. And then he came to a name written over and over again: Isabella Rossi. The diary detailed the late-night calls, the scent of turpentine and perfume on Julian's clothes, the discovery of the affair. Harding's next stop was Isabella Rossi's loft. The warehouse district was a world away from the manicured perfection of the Vale estate. He found her working on a massive, violent splash of a canvas, her clothes and hands smeared with paint. She was striking, exuding an artist's intense, unblinking confidence. She played the part of the concerned acquaintance, her brow furrowed with artistic sympathy. "It's just tragic," she said, wiping her hands on a rag, the smell of oil paint thick in the air. "Poor Evelyn. I barely knew her, of course. I know Julian through my work. He's my biggest patron, a wonderful, generous man. I can't imagine what he must be going through." "When was the last time you saw Mr. Vale?" Harding asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Oh, let me think," she said, tilting her head, a gesture that seemed rehearsed. "It must have been last week before his trip. He came by to see a new piece." "Not on Saturday night?" Harding asked, watching her face closely. For a split second, a flicker of pure panic crossed her features before she could wrestle it back under control. Saturday, she laughed a sound that was a little too high-pitched. No, I was here, buried in my work. I was alone all night. Harding let a small, humorless smile touch his lips. It was time to shake the tree. That's funny, because we have a witness who saw Mr. Vale's car parked right outside your building for several hours on Saturday night. Hard to mistake a car like his. It was a complete bluff, a shot in the dark, but his gut screamed that it would hit its mark. It did. Isabella paled visibly, the color draining from her face, leaving her skin the sallow color of unprimed canvas. That's impossible, she stammered. Your witness must be mistaken. There are a lot of cars. Harding didn't press. He didn't need to. He had seen the truth in her eyes. He left her standing frozen in the middle of her studio, a deer caught in the headlights. Back in his car, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windshield. Harding felt the tumblers of the case clicking into place. A lying husband. A lying mistress. A coordinated alibi. A body was missing, but he could feel a murder in the air. That night, back at his desk, he turned to the final pages of the diary, the ones Evelyn had written in the last days of her life. And that's when the case exploded. He read about the safe, the files, the shell corporations, the systematic fraud. He read her declaration of war. He thinks I am weak. He thinks I am a fool. He has no idea what I'm capable of. He's about to find out. This isn't just about the affair anymore. This is about survival. Harding's blood ran cold. This wasn't a simple love triangle that had erupted into violence. This was an execution. Julian Vale hadn't killed his wife because she'd found out about his girlfriend. He'd killed her because she had found the key to his fraudulent kingdom and was about to burn it to the ground. Evelyn Vale hadn't just been a scorned wife. She had been a threat to his entire empire. He picked up the phone, his knuckles white, and dialed the district attorney's office. "It's Harding," he said, his voice a low, grim rumble. "I need a warrant. A full financial warrant for Julian Vale, his businesses, and every shell corporation he's ever touched. Our missing person is now the victim in a homicide investigation, and I think we're about to uncover one of the biggest financial frauds this city has seen in years." The diary had opened the door. Now it was time to kick it down and see what monsters were hiding in the dark. The leather-bound diary sat on Detective Harding's desk like a time bomb. Under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the squad room, it felt less like an object and more like a presence. It was Evelyn Vale, and she was finally ready to speak. Harding, along with his sharp young partner, Detective Chin, began the solemn task of dissecting her final months, treating each page as a witness statement from the grave. The early entries painted a bleak portrait of profound loneliness, a slow-motion poisoning of the spirit. They weren't just accounts of sadness. They were indictments of neglect, penned in a precise, elegant script that belied the turmoil within. August 14th. Another night alone. Julian called to say he was stuck in a board meeting. I heard music in the background, laughter, a woman's laugh. When I asked about it, he said it was the television in the conference room. He lies so easily now. It's like breathing to him. I find myself wondering if he was ever telling the truth even at the beginning. This house echoes when I'm alone, but the silence is loudest when he is here. She's methodical. Chen observed, looking up from the photocopied page. She notes dates, times, excuses. She's not just venting, she's building a record. Harding nodded grimly. She was a librarian. She knew how to catalog information. She was cataloging her own misery. The diary's tone shifted from melancholy to anguish after the charity gala. The nebulous fear of an affair now had a name and a face: Isabella Rossi. Evelyn's entries became sharper, infused with the specific, painful details of betrayal. October 12th. Her name is Isabella Rossi, the artist. Of course, it makes perfect sense. He's not just sleeping with her, he worships her. He talks about her vision, her genius. He's never used those words about me. I was just Convenient. A suitable accessory. A womb. I looked at her work online tonight. It's all angry slashes of color, chaotic and violent. Is that what he sees in her? A reflection of his own soul? Or just a fire to warm himself by while I freeze in this glass palace? But the true bombshell came in the final fateful entries. The discovery of the files in Julian's safe transformed the diary from a chronicle of a broken heart into the cornerstone of a major criminal investigation. Evelyn's voice changed, her fear replaced by a cold, electrifying resolve. It was no longer the diary of a victim, but the field journal of a combatant. December 7th. I have them. All of them. The files from the safe. It's worse than I ever imagined. It's not just tax evasion. It's a massive scheme. A Ponzi scheme, it looks like. He's been using money from new investors to pay off the old ones, propping up his real estate ventures with phantom profits. The whole Vale empire, this glass house, it's all built on sand, and the tide is about to come in. He's used shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, all named after characters from his favorite Shakespeare plays. Prospero Holdings. Oberon Investments. The irony is sickening. He sees himself as a master manipulator, a king pulling the strings, but he got sloppy. He used the same lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, to set them all up. His signature is on every document. Harding paused his pen, hovering over his notepad. Marcus Thorne. He underlined the name 3 times. Get me everything on this guy, he said to Chen, and find a Sharon Mills, a lawyer specializing in forensic accounting. Evelyn spoke to her. The next pages contained a meticulously transcribed list of account numbers, transaction dates, and corporate entities. It was a detailed roadmap of Julian's criminal enterprise. Evelyn hadn't just found the gun, she'd provided the ballistics report. The team moved with newfound urgency. The financial warrant fast-tracked by a judge who saw the potential scale of the fraud came through by dawn. Harding sent 2 of his most experienced detectives, a pair of grizzled veterans named O'Malley and Diaz, to pay a visit to Marcus Thorne. Thorne's office was on the top floor of a Century City skyscraper, a symphony of polished mahogany and smug success. He greeted the detectives with the oily confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. That confidence evaporated the moment O'Malley slid the warrant across the massive desk. A financial warrant. Thorne scoffed, barely glancing at it. This is harassment. I'll have to ask you to direct any questions to my... This isn't a friendly chat, Mr. Thorne. Diaz cut in his voice like gravel. This is a homicide investigation, and right now your name is appearing alongside terms like criminal conspiracy, wire fraud, and accessory to murder. We can have this conversation here, or we can have it in a much smaller room downtown. Your choice. The color drained from Thorne's face. The mention of murder shattered his carefully constructed facade. He stammered about attorney-client privilege, but his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. He was sweating, his hand trembling as he reached for the phone to call his own lawyer. The detectives didn't need a confession. They had his fear. It was just as good. Meanwhile, Harding and Chen visited Sharon Mills. Her office was the polar opposite of Thorne's modest, cluttered, and practical. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 40s. Yes, I remember the call, she confirmed, peering at them over her glasses after Harding explained the situation. She didn't give a name. Said her husband was a prominent businessman. She laid out a hypothetical scenario involving offshore accounts and layering investments to hide revenue. I'll be honest with you, detectives, it sounded less hypothetical and more like she was reading from a textbook on how to run a Ponzi scheme. Did she sound scared? Chen asked. Sharon Mills paused, considering. Not scared. Determined. There was steel in her voice. She said the proof was incontrovertible and that she intended to use it to secure her freedom and her child's future. She was supposed to call me back to schedule a formal consultation. She never did. Back at the precinct, the final pieces slammed into place with breathtaking speed. The lab report on the single dark hair found near the kitchen island came back. The DNA was a perfect match to Isabella Rossi. Harding stood before the large whiteboard, a storm of evidence swirling around the photos of the three main players. He drew a thick red line from Julian to Isabella, labeling it affair. He drew another from Julian to Marcus Thorne, labeling it financial fraud. He then drew a circle around Evelyn's smiling photo and from it arrows pointing to every piece of the puzzle. She was the hub. She was the one who connected it all. So here's our timeline. Harding said, pacing in front of the board, his voice low and intense. Evelyn discovers the affair. That's motive for a divorce. But then she discovers the fraud. That's motive for murder. Julian Vale isn't just facing the loss of half his assets. He's facing 20 years in a federal prison. His whole kingdom crumbles. She confronts him on Saturday night. Chen picked up the thread. He realizes she's not bluffing. He panics. No, Harding corrected, stopping his pacing. This guy doesn't panic. He rages. Evelyn mentioned his temper in the diary. He doesn't see a problem to be solved. He sees an existential threat to be eliminated. He tapped Julian's photo. A narcissist like this, when cornered, doesn't negotiate. He annihilates. And Isabella was there, Chen added, pointing to the lab report pinned to the board. She lied about being at her studio. She was at the house. She was a participant or a witness. Harding agreed. Either way, she's an accomplice. They kill Evelyn, likely an impulsive act of violence during the argument, a shove, a fall, a crack against that marble island. Then the cleanup. They wipe the kitchen, they get rid of the body, they stage the car at LAX to make it look like she ran away. A distraught husband reports his unstable pregnant wife missing. It's a clean, classic cover-up. He paused, picking up the leather-bound diary from the evidence table. But they made one fatal mistake. In their arrogance, in their haste to get rid of the woman, they forgot about her words. They forgot about her mind. They left behind the single most powerful witness against them. He looked at the faces of his team, the grim reality of the case settling over them. They had moved from a missing person case to a complex web of infidelity, corporate crime, and murder in less than 48 hours. All because one woman had the courage to write it all down. "All right," Harding said, his voice hard as iron. "Let's go pick them up. Let's see how Mr. Vale and Ms. Rossi's stories hold up when they're not celebrating their freedom, but sitting in separate interrogation rooms, staring at first-degree murder charges." The diary had done its job. It had spoken for the victim. Now it was time for the law to bring the monsters out of the dark. The arrests were synchronized with military precision, executed in the cold gray moments just before dawn. At the Vale mansion, the silent majesty of the glass and stone structure was shattered by the sharp, authoritative knock on the door. Julian Vale, clad in a black silk robe, opened it himself. The mask of the bereaved husband, so carefully worn for days, disintegrated in an instant. It was not fear or surprise that flashed in his eyes, but a chilling, contemptuous fury. He seemed insulted by the intrusion, by the sheer audacity of the law to breach his kingdom. He said nothing as the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, his gaze fixed on Detective Harding, a look of pure reptilian hatred that promised retribution. Miles away, the scene at Isabella Rossi's loft was one of chaotic, theatrical despair. She answered the door in a paint-splattered jumpsuit, her wild hair a halo around her pale, tear-streaked face. When the detectives identified themselves, she collapsed, a marionette with its strings cut, her sobs echoing in the vast warehouse space amidst her violent, angry canvases. It was Julian, she cried, her voice a shrill instrument of practiced victimhood. "He lied to me. I don't know anything. I'm a victim, too." It was a compelling performance, but Harding had read Evelyn's diary. He knew Isabella was no one's victim but her own. At the precinct, they were placed in separate, sterile interrogation rooms, the blank white walls an unholy confessional. The air hummed with the silent tension of the game about to be played. Harding's strategy was classic, a test of loyalty between two people who had none divide, pressure, and conquer. He began with Isabella. He let her stew for nearly an hour, her sobs subsiding into ragged, hiccuping breaths. When he finally entered, he projected an air of weary sympathy. "This is a mess, isn't it, Isabella?" He began placing a cup of water on the metal table. "He's a monster," she whispered, clutching the cup with trembling hands. "He told me she was unstable. He said he was afraid she'd hurt the baby, that she was suicidal. He lied to you about a lot of things," Harding said, his voice gentle. He let a beat of silence pass. "Did you know his business was a sham, a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme on the verge of collapse?" Isabella's head shot up, her dark eyes wide with a shock that for the first time seemed genuine. "What?" "No. He told me. He told me he was the most successful man he knew. He was successful at lying," Harding corrected. "And Evelyn found out. She found proof that could send him to prison for the rest of his life. That's why he had to get rid of her, Isabella. That's the real reason. It was never about saving you from the unstable wife. It was about saving himself from prison." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Were you there, Isabella? Did you go to the house that night?" "No," she insisted, her voice cracking. "I was here. I was working all night, I swear." Harding sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "That's a shame, because we have you at the scene." He watched as her bravado began to crumble. "We found one of your hairs in the kitchen. Long, dark, beautiful. A forensic match. We also have security footage from a neighbor's house showing your car, that distinctive red convertible, pulling away from the Vale Street just after 1 a.m, about an hour after Julian left." The last of Isabella's composure shattered. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, the lies she had constructed dissolving in the face of immutable facts. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a raw animal panic. It was the frantic calculus of self-preservation. "He called me," she blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in a desperate, chaotic flood. "He was in a panic. He said she'd attacked him, that she'd gone crazy, and she fell. He said it was an accident. He begged me to come, said he didn't know what to do. I was scared. He has a temper. You don't know what he's like. I only helped because I was afraid of him. He wrapped her up. He put her in his car. He made me follow him to the coast. He said it was the only way, that if we stuck together no one would ever know. He told me what to say." She was sobbing again, but these were the tears of a cornered animal, not of grief. She gave them the location of the cliff, a desperate offering to save herself, of pinning every ounce of malice and intent squarely on her lover. Armed with a confession and a location, Harding walked down the hall to Julian's room. The millionaire sat ramrod straight, the picture of arrogant defiance. Harding said nothing. He simply placed the leather-bound diary on the table between them. Julian's eyes locked onto the book. For a single unguarded moment, his mask of icy control slipped. It was a flicker of pure, unadulterated dread. The one variable he had failed to control. The one detail he had overlooked in his panicked, meticulous cleanup. "We found it," Julian Harding said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of condemnation. "In her handbag, in her car at the airport. You made one mistake. You forgot her diary." Harding opened the book, not to the last page, but to an entry from months earlier. He read aloud Evelyn's words about her loneliness, about feeling like a ghost in her own home, about her hopes for the baby. He then flipped to another, her account of the humiliation she felt at the gala, watching him with Isabella. His voice was flat, dispassionate, letting Evelyn's words fill the sterile room. Finally he turned to the last entry and read her premonition aloud, her fear of his temper, her vow not to be silenced. When he finished, the silence was a physical thing pressing in on them. "Your girlfriend is in the next room," Harding said conversationally. "She's confessed to everything. She's painting a very detailed picture for the DA, a picture of a cold-blooded killer who manipulated her, who forced her to help cover up the murder of his pregnant wife. She's saving herself, Julian. She gave you up to save her own skin." Julian's jaw was a knot of granite. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. He was a king whose castle had just been stormed, whose subjects had all betrayed him. And it was this small, insignificant book that had brought it all crashing down. His quiet, compliant wife had authored his destruction. But the story Harding would soon learn had one final breathtaking chapter. While the dive teams recovered Evelyn's body from the unforgiving sea and the DA's office celebrated their ironclad case, a few loose threads began to bother the detective. The coroner's report landed on his desk. The cause of death was, as expected, blunt force trauma to the head. But the toxicology report contained an anomaly. There were trace amounts of a powerful, fast-acting sedative in Evelyn's system. Not enough to kill her, but certainly enough to render a person groggy, confused, and physically impaired. It was not a medication any of her doctors had prescribed. Then a junior detective recataloguing the evidence from Evelyn's car made a report. The small getaway bag and the burner phone she'd mentioned in her diary were missing. They hadn't been in her handbag, and they weren't in the trunk. They were simply gone. Harding sat in his office late into the night, the diary open before him, the coroner's report next to it. The pieces didn't fit the narrative of a simple confrontation gone wrong. A sedative. A missing escape bag. Her final words echoed in his mind. I have a plan. I pray I'm strong enough to see it through. What if the confrontation wasn't the plan? What if it was the plan falling apart, on a gut instinct that had served him for 30 years? Harding put in a request. He wanted the passenger manifest for every international flight that left LAX on the Saturday night Evelyn died. His team worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and the thrill of the hunt. At 4 a.m. they found it. A one-way ticket to Buenos Aires, Argentina. It had been purchased with cash a week earlier. The name on the ticket wasn't Evelyn Vale. It was Elena Reed. A quick check of Evelyn's file confirmed it. Reed was her mother's maiden name. The final staggering truth hit Harding with the force of a physical blow. Evelyn's plan was never to confront Julian and beg for a divorce. That was what she wrote for them to find. Her real plan was far bolder. She was going to escape. She had likely drugged Julian's coffee, planning to incapacitate him just long enough for her to retrieve the original financial documents from his safe, grab her escape bag, and disappear into the night to start a new life with her child in South America. But Julian's unexpected decision to leave for Isabella's loft that night had thrown a wrench in her desperate, brilliant plan. He'd left before the sedative could fully take hold, forcing a premature improvised confrontation. The struggle was real, the fatal blow was real, but her intent had never been to face the monster. It had been to flee him. She had been agonizingly close to freedom. In the end, the weight of the evidence, the diary, the financial crimes, Isabella's testimony, and the body was overwhelming. Julian Vale was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his cold fury in the courtroom a terrifying spectacle. Isabella Rossi, for her role as an accessory, received a 15-year sentence. The Vale empire, a glittering mirage built on fraud, evaporated, leaving a wake of devastated investors. The glass house on the cliff was eventually sold, a monument to a spectacular downfall. And locked away in an evidence room, the leather-bound diary remained the last testament of Evelyn Reed Vale, a woman everyone had underestimated. She had not survived the storm, but from beyond the grave, her words had unleashed a hurricane of truth, ensuring the man who took her life and the woman who helped him would never again taste the freedom they had so viciously celebrated. The story of Evelyn Vale is a chilling reminder that the most dangerous secrets often hide behind the most perfect facades. The click of the door was the sound of a life breaking. For Taylor Vance, 8 months pregnant and full of hope, that sound was the starting pistol for a race she never knew she was in. She came bearing gifts of love and peace, a small surprise for her millionaire husband, Harrison Thorne. But the surprise was hers. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's about the moment a loving wife realizes her home is a boardroom, her marriage is a hostile takeover, and the woman sitting in her chair isn't just a mistress, she's a predator, aiming for the throne. What happens when the woman who helped build an empire discovers she's about to be demolished by it? Stay with us. The air in the private elevator of the Thorne Industries Tower was so cold it felt like a warning. Taylor Vance clutched the small, elegant box of macarons from Le Ciel Pâtisserie, a little tighter the warmth of the fresh pastries, a stark contrast to the chill seeping into her bones. At 34 weeks pregnant, every movement was a deliberate, weighty effort. A soft, insistent kick from within reminded her why she was doing this. For them, for their family, for the man she loved who had seemed so distant lately. Harrison Thorne wasn't just a husband. He was an event, a force of nature that had swept her up 7 years ago and placed her at the center of a glittering world she'd only ever read about. He built his tech empire from the ground up, and she had been there for every sleepless night, every risky investment, every triumphant breakthrough. She'd been his sounding board, his quiet strategist, his soft place to land. But the last 6 months had been different. The late nights became all-nighters. The hushed phone calls ended the moment she entered a room. The easy intimacy they shared had been replaced by a polite, almost professional distance. Harrison had blamed it on the stress of a massive new acquisition, a deal he called the legacy maker. Taylor, ever the supportive wife, had tried to believe him. She suggested a baby moon a weekend away before their son arrived. He had gently declined his hand, patting her swollen belly with a distracted air. Soon, Elle, I promise. After this deal closes, it's just you and me and him. Today, however, a wave of loneliness had washed over her so profoundly it felt like a premonition. She'd found herself driving downtown, the box of his favorite salted caramel macarons on the passenger seat like a peace offering. A surprise visit, a small, desperate attempt to breach the walls he had built around himself. The elevator doors opened onto the 55th floor with a soft chime. The executive floor. The air here was different, thinner, scented with money, and a faint, sharp aroma of something floral she couldn't quite place. Harrison's executive assistant, a young, impeccably dressed woman named Clara, looked up from her desk, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Taylor, Mrs. Thorne, we weren't expecting you. I know, Clara, spontaneous, Taylor said, trying for a lightness she didn't feel. I brought Harrison a little treat. Is he in a meeting? Clara's eyes darted toward the imposing double doors of Harrison's office. He is engaged. It's a very sensitive time with the acquisition. Oh, I won't stay long. Just a minute to see his face. Taylor insisted, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The baby kicked again, a little drumbeat of impatience. Clara hesitated, a flicker of panic in her eyes. Perhaps I should just let him know you're here first. But Taylor was already moving, her maternal instincts overriding the polite protocols of the corporate world. Don't be silly, Clara. He's my husband, not the president. She gave the young woman a warm, disarming smile and pushed open one of the heavy oak doors before Clara could protest further. And then time stopped. The office was a testament to Harrison's success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panorama of the city below. A sleek, minimalist space dominated by a massive mahogany desk that was more like a command center. Harrison was there, standing by the windows, his back to the door. But he wasn't alone, and a woman was sitting in her chair. It wasn't just any chair. It was the Eames lounge chair and ottoman in plush ivory leather that Taylor had gifted Harrison on their 5th anniversary. It was their chair. The one where she would sit and read while he worked late, their feet often tangled together. The one where they had dreamed up names for their future child. In it sat a woman who was the physical antithesis of Taylor. Where Taylor was soft curves and warm, approachable beauty, this woman was sharp angles and cool, predatory elegance. She was tall and slender, dressed in a form-fitting sheath dress the color of blood. Her dark hair was cut in a severe geometric bob, and her legs, crossed with an air of absolute ownership, seemed to go on forever. Her gaze, when it lifted to meet Taylor's, was not one of shock or guilt. It was one of bored assessment, like a queen examining a commoner who had wandered into the throne room. Harrison spun around his face, a mask of horror. Taylor, What? What are you doing here? The air crackled. The floral scent Taylor had noticed earlier was stronger here, emanating from the woman in the chair. It was Baccarat Rouge 540, an expensive, intoxicating perfume that Taylor had once smelled on a scarf Harrison had brought home from a business trip to Paris 2 months ago. He'd claimed it must have belonged to a colleague from the airline. Taylor's hand fell from the doorknob. The box of macarons slipped from her other hand, hitting the plush carpet with a soft, pathetic thud. Her voice, when it finally came, was a choked whisper. "I could ask you the same question, Harrison." Her eyes were locked on the woman who hadn't moved a muscle. The woman's lips curved into a slow, deliberate smirk. She uncrossed her legs, the whisper of nylon a gunshot in the silent room, and leaned forward slightly, placing her manicured hands on the arms of the chair, as if she were settling into a seat that had been hers all along. "Who is she?" Taylor breathed, though she felt she already knew the answer in the deepest, most terrified part of her soul. Harrison rushed forward, his hands fluttering uselessly. "Elle, this isn't what it looks like. This is Isabella Rossi. She's my new COO. We were just going over the final details of the acquisition. You're misunderstanding." Isabella Rossi, the name was vaguely familiar, a rising star in the tech world known for her ruthless tactics. A shark. Isabella finally spoke, her voice as smooth and cold as marble. "I believe your husband is trying to say you've arrived at an inconvenient time, Mrs. Thorne." She didn't stand. She didn't acknowledge Taylor's advanced pregnancy. She held her ground, her posture a silent declaration of war. The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it stole the air from Taylor's lungs. The intimacy of the scene she'd walked in on was undeniable. The way Harrison stood, the way Isabella sat, the charged energy in the room. It wasn't a business meeting. It was an occupation. Taylor looked from her husband's panicked face to Isabella's smug one. She looked at the chair, her chair now claimed by another. And in that moment she understood. The distance, the secrets, the lies. It wasn't about an acquisition. It was about a replacement. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the office, closing the door softly behind her. The click echoed down the hallway, a definitive, soul-crushing sound. It wasn't just a door closing. It was the end of a chapter, the end of a dream, the end of the life she thought she had. As she walked past Clara's desk, ignoring the assistant's horrified expression, a single cold thought solidified in her mind. This was not just an affair. This was a coup, and she had just been dethroned. The drive home was a blur of rain-streaked glass and the rhythmic, mocking thump of the windshield wipers. Taylor drove on autopilot, her mind a raging storm of images. Isabella's smug smile, the proprietary way her hands rested on the arms of the ivory chair. Harrison's face pale and slack with the shock of being caught. Each detail was a fresh stab of pain. By the time she pulled into the sweeping driveway of their modernist glass and steel home, her tears had dried, leaving behind a cold, hard residue of fury. She walked through the cavernous, silent house. Every object seemed to mock her. The abstract painting they'd bought in Santorini on their honeymoon, the sprawling custom sofa where they'd mapped out their future, the framed ultrasound photo on the mantelpiece, a smiling three-dimensional glimpse of their son. It all felt like a set piece in a play where she no longer knew her lines. She went to their master bedroom and stood before the walk-in closet, a vast space larger than her first apartment. She stared at Harrison's side rows of bespoke suits, shelves of gleaming leather shoes, a rack of perfectly pressed shirts. The faint, cloying scent of Baccarat Rouge 540 still clung to the air near his travel bag. It had been there for weeks, a ghost she had refused to see. Hours later, Harrison came home. He found her in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, her hands wrapped around her belly, as if to shield their unborn child from the wreckage of their lives. The room was painted a soft, hopeful blue. A mobile of hand-carved wooden planets hung over the empty crib. He didn't rush in, didn't start with apologies. He leaned against the doorframe, his expensive suit looking rumpled and out of place. "Elle," he began, his voice low and cautious. "We need to talk." Do we? She replied, not looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the planet Jupiter spinning slowly in the dim light. I think the scene at your office was quite eloquent. You don't understand. It was not what you think. The classic cowardly opening line, a rage so potent it was almost dizzying, surged through Taylor. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. Then tell me what to think, Harrison. Should I think it's normal for your new chief operating officer to be lounging in your private office in my anniversary gift, looking like she owns the place? Should I think her perfume ending up on your clothes is just a coincidence? Tell me. Build me a version of the truth I can live with. You're good at building things. He flinched but moved further into the room. Isabella is aggressive. She's a brilliant operator, but she blurs lines. She makes herself at home everywhere. It's her M.O. It means nothing. I was handling it. Handling it? Taylor's laugh was a brittle, ugly sound. It looked to me like she was handling you. That's not fair, he said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. You're emotional. You're pregnant. You're seeing things that aren't there because you're feeling insecure. It was the gaslighter's masterstroke, turning her own vulnerability against her. He was using their baby, their shared joy, as a weapon to invalidate her reality. Don't you dare, she whispered, her voice trembling with the effort of keeping it level. Don't you dare use our son as an excuse for your betrayal. He knelt before her, then taking her hands in his. His were cold. There is no betrayal. Elle, look at me. I love you. I love this family we're building. This acquisition is the most stressful, high-stakes deal of my life. It's worth hundreds of millions. Isabella was brought in by the board to see it through. Her methods are unorthodox, but she gets results. That's all this is. Work. I swear to you. He looked sincere. The Harrison she knew, the man she had loved, was there in his eyes, pleading with her. For a dizzying moment she wanted to believe him. It would be so much easier to dismiss it all as the paranoid fantasy of a hormonal pregnant woman, to retreat back into the comfortable illusion of her life. I need you to trust me, he said softly, placing a hand on her stomach. For him. We can't let this stress affect the baby. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. She was a statue frozen by a conflict that was tearing her apart. She was in my chair, Harrison. It's just a piece of furniture, he dismissed a little too quickly. No, Taylor said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. It was a symbol, and you let her sit in it. He saw he was losing, so he switched tactics. The next day, a velvet box from Cartier appeared on her pillow. Inside was a diamond necklace, delicate and blindingly expensive. A text followed, for the most beautiful mother-to-be in the world. I love you. Forgive my stress. The day after, a team of landscapers arrived to redesign the garden into the English rose garden she'd always wanted. He was trying to bury the truth under a mountain of expensive gestures. He was renovating the scenery, hoping she wouldn't notice the foundational rot. For a week, Taylor existed in a state of suspended disbelief. She allowed him to play the part of the doting, apologetic husband. They ate dinner together. He rubbed her aching back. They talked about the baby. But something had irrevocably shifted. The trust, once a solid, unshakable foundation, was now a web of hairline fractures. She would watch him type a text and wonder who it was for. She would smell his shirt when he came home searching for the phantom scent of Baccarat Rouge. The breaking point came a week after the confrontation. Harrison was in the shower. His phone, which was usually glued to his hand, lay on the bedside table. It buzzed. Taylor glanced over, her heart hammering against her ribs. A message preview glowed on the screen. It was from IR. The asset transfer is complete. Phase 1 is done. You handled the liability surprisingly well. Time to focus on what's important. Liability. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't a wife. She wasn't a partner. She wasn't even Taylor. She was a liability to be handled. And what was the asset transfer? The water in the shower shut off. Taylor's mind raced. She thought of Harrison's recent insistence that they consolidate their finances, moving her personal inheritance from a trust fund into a joint investment account he managed. He'd called it more efficient. At the time, she'd seen it as a sign of their partnership. Now it felt like something far more sinister. She picked up her tablet, her hands shaking. She logged into their joint investment portal. Her blood ran cold. 2 days ago, a sum of $5 million had been moved from the account. It wasn't transferred to Thorne Industries or any known subsidiary. It was wired to a numbered company she had never heard of, Argentum Holdings, LLC. She wasn't just being cheated on. She was being erased. This wasn't a simple, sordid affair. It was an operation, a meticulously planned conspiracy with her, their marriage, and her own money as collateral damage. Harrison wasn't just building a legacy, he was building it on the ruins of her life. And Isabella Rossi wasn't just the other woman. She was the architect. The fury that had been a slow-burning ember in Taylor's chest now roared into a conflagration. The hurt was still there, a deep, cavernous ache, but it was now sharpened by a terrifying clarity. She was not a victim of a cheating husband. She was the target of a corporate raider who happened to be sleeping with the CEO. The term liability echoed in her mind. It was cold, impersonal, and utterly dehumanizing. It was the language of a business deal, not a marriage. Her first instinct was to confront Harrison, to throw the tablet at his chest, and demand an explanation for Argentum Holdings. But the woman who had naively walked into his office a week ago was gone. That woman was trusting. This woman, the one staring at the multi-million-dollar hole in her life, knew that a direct confrontation would only be met with more lies, more gaslighting. Harrison and Isabella had underestimated her. They saw a soft domestic creature easily placated with diamonds and roses. They had forgotten the woman she used to be before Harrison Thorne. Taylor Vance, the art history graduate who had worked as a provenance researcher for a major auction house. Her job had been to trace the history of objects, to follow the paper trail through centuries of deception, theft, and war. She was trained to spot forgeries both on canvas and in documents. It was time to resurrect that woman. Her first call was not to a lawyer but to an old friend from her auction house days. Chloe Evans was a forensic accountant, a woman who could make numbers sing and balance sheets confess their sins. They hadn't spoken in months, a casualty of Taylor's all-consuming new life, but Chloe answered on the second ring. "Elle, is that you? You sound different." "I need your help, Chloe," Taylor said, her voice low and urgent. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "And I need you to be discreet, utterly." She explained the situation in clipped, precise terms, stripping it of emotion and presenting it as a case study. The powerful husband, the new COO, the suspicious text, the shell company, the $5 million transfer from an account containing her own inherited funds. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then a low whistle. "Ellie, you've walked into a snake pit. Argentum Holdings sounds vaguely villainous. Give me the details. The wire transfer number, the date, the name of the receiving bank. I'll see what I can dig up. But listen to me." Chloe's voice became serious. "Do not let him know you suspect anything. From this moment on, you are an actress. You are the happy, oblivious, pregnant wife. You smile, you rub your belly, you ask him what he wants for dinner. You do not give him any reason to suspect the liability is developing teeth." The advice was chilling but necessary. That evening when Harrison came home, Taylor was waiting for him, a warm smile on her face. She had cooked his favorite meal, osso buco. She asked about his day and didn't flinch when he mentioned Isabella's name in a work context. She played the part of her life, and it was the most harrowing performance she had ever given. She felt like a spy in her own home. While Harrison slept, Taylor worked. Armed with a new untraceable laptop and a secure internet connection, she began her own investigation. She started with Isabella Rossi. The woman's public profile was impeccable. A Wharton graduate, a series of spectacular successes, turning around struggling tech firms, a reputation for being brilliant and utterly ruthless. But Taylor wasn't interested in her resume. She dug deeper, scrolling through years of social media news articles and industry forums. She found a photo from a tech conference in Berlin 3 years ago. Harrison had been a keynote speaker. In the background of a group shot, partially obscured, was Isabella watching him with an intensity that was anything but professional. The affair, Taylor realized with a sickening jolt, wasn't a recent development. It was a long game. Isabella hadn't just appeared in their lives. She had been targeting Harrison for years. Then she turned her attention to the finances. Using the access she still had, she began downloading statements, years of them. Credit cards, investment accounts, household expenses. It was a painstaking, soul-crushing process. Every line item was a potential clue, a piece of the mosaic of deceit. A charge from a florist in a city Harrison had never mentioned visiting. A hotel bill from a weekend he was supposedly on a solo fishing trip. And then she found the pattern. Small, regular cash withdrawals from a joint account, always from an ATM near a particular downtown condo building. Never large enough to raise an eyebrow on their own, but over 2 years they added up to tens of thousands of dollars. A secret slush fund. Chloe called back 2 days later. "I've got something on Argentum Holdings," she said, her voice tight. "It's a ghost, incorporated in Delaware 6 months ago. The listed director is a man named Michael Stone, but I ran a check on him. He doesn't exist. The address is a P.O. box. It's a classic shell designed to be anonymous, but I got a lucky break." "What is it?" Taylor asked, her pen poised over a notepad. "The initial funding to open its corporate bank account. It wasn't Harrison's money. It was a wire transfer from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account belonging to Rossi." Taylor's breath hitched. "Isabella funded it." "She opened the door, Ellie. Harrison walked through it with your $5 million. But it gets worse. I pulled the public trading logs for the last few months. Argentum Holdings hasn't been sitting idle. It's been buying something, quietly, in small strategic blocks to avoid attention." "Buying what?" Chloe took a deep breath. "Shares. In a company called Innovate Dynamics." The name hit Taylor like a physical blow. Innovate Dynamics wasn't just any company. It was Thorne Industries' biggest and most formidable rival. Their co-founder and CEO, David Chen, was a brilliant engineer who had been in a fierce public battle with Harrison for market share for years. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying snap. This wasn't about expanding Thorne Industries. A company doesn't use a secret off-the-books shell corporation funded by an executive's mistress and marital assets to do business. This was something else entirely, something personal. They weren't planning an acquisition, they were planning a hostile takeover. A stealth attack on Harrison's greatest rival, using his own wife's money as the ammunition. And the new entity, the one that would rise from the ashes of this corporate war, would be Argentum Holdings, a company controlled by Isabella, funded by Taylor, with Harrison as her willing partner. Taylor hung up the phone, a wave of nausea washing over her that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the laptop. The face staring back was pale and drawn, but the eyes were hard as flint. The game had changed. They weren't just trying to erase her from the marriage. They were using her to build a new empire, one where she would have no place, no claim, no future. It was the ultimate betrayal, not just of her heart, but of her legacy. She had been the silent partner in building Thorne Industries. Now she was the unwilling financier of its successor. The revelation that she was unwittingly funding a secret war against her husband's biggest rival shifted something fundamental inside Taylor. The personal pain of betrayal, while still a raw, open wound, was now overlaid with a cold, strategic anger. This was bigger than a broken heart. This was grand larceny disguised as a boardroom power play. Harrison and Isabella weren't just destroying a marriage. They were playing with lives, careers, and the stability of an entire industry, all funded by stolen money. Her money. She knew she was at a critical juncture. She had the what, a hostile takeover plot. She had the how, the shell company Argentum Holdings. But she didn't have the why. Why the secrecy Thorne Industries was a behemoth. If Harrison wanted to acquire a rival, he had the legitimate corporate muscle to do it. Why resort to this back-alley cloak-and-dagger scheme that put him, the company, and her at such enormous risk? The answer, she suspected, lay in the very foundations of the empire they had built together. Chloe's voice echoed in her head. You are an actress. The role was becoming more difficult to play. Every shared meal was a performance. Every feigned smile felt like a betrayal of herself. Every time Harrison touched her belly and spoke of their future, a black, bitter bile rose in her throat. She was a vessel for their child and simultaneously the vessel for their deception. The irony was suffocating. She realized she couldn't continue alone. Chloe was her financial eyes and ears, but she needed someone who understood the legal labyrinth of corporate governance. She needed a weapon. That weapon had a name, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was Harrison's older brother, and the two were like oil and water. Where Harrison was a slick, charismatic empire builder, Marcus was a quiet, principled corporate lawyer who had left the family business years ago after a bitter falling out over Harrison's ethically flexible business practices. He now worked as in-house counsel for a nonprofit. He and Harrison had not spoken in years, but he had always maintained a soft spot for Taylor, seeing her as a grounding force for his volatile younger brother. He'd sent a beautiful handcrafted crib for the baby just last month, with a simple handwritten note, "May this child have his mother's heart and integrity." It was a huge risk. Contacting Marcus could blow the entire thing open, but she was running out of options. She drove to a small independent coffee shop halfway across town, bought a burner phone with cash, and made the call. Marcus, it's Taylor. There was a pause. Taylor, is everything all right? You sound stressed. Is it the baby? The baby is fine, she said, her voice tight. Marcus, I am in terrible trouble. Harrison is in terrible trouble, and I need a lawyer I can trust implicitly. I need you. She met him that afternoon in a secluded corner of a public library, the scent of old paper and dust a strange comfort. Marcus, with his thoughtful eyes and tweed jacket, looked more like a university professor than a shark. But when Taylor laid out the evidence, the printed bank statements, the notes on Argentum Holdings, the details of the share purchases, the text from IR, his expression hardened, the gentle academic replaced by a razor-sharp legal mind. He listened without interruption, his fingers steepled before him. When she finished, he was silent for a full minute, his gaze distant. He's using marital assets to fund a secret off-the-books hostile takeover bid with his COO, Marcus stated, not as a question, but as a grim confirmation. And your inheritance was the seed money. My God, Taylor. Why Marcus? She pleaded. Why would he do it this way? Why the shell company? Why the risk? Marcus leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. Control and greed. A legitimate takeover bid through Thorne Industries would be subject to board approval, to shareholder votes, to SEC oversight. It would be scrutinized. There would be questions. But if he and Rossi acquire Innovate Dynamics personally through a private entity like Argentum, they own it outright. They can merge it, strip it for parts, do whatever they want without answering to anyone. But it's illegal, Taylor stated. It's more than illegal. It's a catastrophic breach of his fiduciary duty as CEO. Marcus explained, his eyes flashing with anger. He's using company resources, his time, his knowledge, likely inside information, to enrich himself personally. And he's entangled you in a massive conspiracy. If this blows up, you as a partner in the joint account that funded it could be implicated in securities fraud and illegal acquisition schemes. The room seemed to tilt. She had been so focused on the betrayal that she hadn't fully grasped her own legal peril. They hadn't just made her a victim, they'd made her an unwilling accomplice. What do I do? she asked, the weight of it all pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. We need more, Marcus said, his mind clearly working, mapping out a strategy. We need irrefutable proof that ties Harrison directly to Argentum. We need to understand the end game. What is their final move? And we need to find the original documents. What original documents? The founding documents for Thorn Industries, Marcus said. I was there, remember? At the very beginning. You weren't just a supportive wife, Taylor. That first round of angel investment, the $50,000 that got the server running, that came from the trust your grandmother left you. You were a seed investor. Your name should be on the initial partnership agreements. A memory, hazy and distant, surfaced in Taylor's mind. A late night in their tiny apartment years ago. A pile of papers. Harrison saying, "It's just legal boilerplate L sign here and here. We're in this together." She had signed full of love and trust, never reading the fine print. I think I remember, she stammered. He told me we were partners. Let's find out how he defined partner, Marcus said grimly. Those documents are likely in a vault either at his office or with his corporate law firm. Getting them will be difficult, but they could be the key. If your name is on them as a founding partner, you're not just a wronged wife. You are a co-owner of the entire empire, and you have rights he has systematically violated. Taylor left the library feeling a strange mixture of terror and empowerment. She now had a team, Chloe the financial bloodhound and Marcus the legal strategist. They were her allies in the shadows, fighting a war Harrison and Isabella didn't even know had been declared. The mission was no longer just about survival. It was about reclamation. She wasn't just fighting for her money or her marriage anymore. She was fighting for her very identity, for the truth of her role in the creation of Harrison's world, a world he was now trying to burn to the ground with her inside it. The actress had her script, and the next act was about to begin. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like an elaborate prison. Every corner held a memory now tainted. Every shadow seemed to hide a lie. Taylor moved through her days with a placid, serene mask, a perfect portrayal of the expectant mother nesting before the storm of childbirth. Inside, however, a glacial calm had settled. The emotional tempest had passed, leaving behind the cold, hard landscape of resolve. She was no longer just reacting. She was hunting. The hunt for the founding documents became her obsession. Marcus was right, they were the key. They were the legal proof of her very existence in the narrative of Thorn Industries, a narrative Harrison was actively trying to erase. Marcus began a subtle legal probe, sending carefully worded inquiries to Harrison's law firm, citing the need for estate planning due to the impending birth of an heir. It was a plausible pretext, but one that was met with stonewalling and delays. The documents were in deep archival, they were told. Retrieving them would take time. It was a polite corporate no. Taylor knew they wouldn't get them through official channels. Harrison or Isabella had likely already given instructions to bury them. So she turned to a different kind of archive, her own memory. She thought back to the early days, to the cramped apartment that served as their first home and office. Where would Harrison have kept something so important? He was a man of habits even then. He was also a man who believed in backups and redundancies. A digital copy. There had to be a digital copy. Her mind went to the old server. Before the gleaming racks in the Thorn Tower data center, there was the Chimera, a custom-built server that lived in their coat closet, its fans a constant hum in their small apartment. It held their entire life business plans, code repositories, financial models, and personal photos. When they moved into their first real office, the data was migrated and the old server was decommissioned. Harrison, ever the sentimentalist about his own creations, had refused to scrap it. "It's the cornerstone, L," he'd said. "You don't throw away the cornerstone." She found it in the climate-controlled storage room in their basement, tucked away under a dust cover behind boxes of old prototypes. It was an ugly beige tower, an ancient relic in the fast-moving world of tech. But to Taylor, it was a time capsule, a digital ghost of their shared past. Getting it running was a challenge. The power supply was archaic, the connections obsolete. She spent 2 days researching old tech forums, ordering obscure cables online with a prepaid credit card, her burgeoning belly a constant awkward obstacle as she worked on the floor of the basement. Finally, one evening, while Harrison was at a late dinner with the board, she powered it on. The old fans whirred to life with a groan, and a basic text-based operating system flickered onto the small monitor she'd set up. There was no graphical interface, no easy search bar. It was a digital maze of directories and subdirectories. For hours she navigated the command line, her fingers remembering the old codes, digging through layers of forgotten files. She found their first business plan full of typos and audacious dreams. She found photos from their first vacation, two young, hopeful people squinting into the sun. Each file was a small, painful reminder of the man he used to be, of the us that had once existed. And then she found it, in a password-protected, encrypted folder labeled Genesis. Her heart hammered. The password. What would it be? She tried the obvious ones. Their anniversary, her birthday, the company name. Nothing. She closed her eyes, trying to transport herself back in time. What was important to him then? What was his world? It wasn't about money or success yet. It was about an idea. An idea he had named Project Icarus. She typed it in. ICARUS. Access granted. The folder opened, revealing a handful of scanned PDF files. The first one she clicked on was titled Thorne Vance Founding Partnership Agreement.ppdf. Her hands trembled as she opened it, and there it was, in stark black and white. A legal document drafted by a small local law firm dated 7 years ago. It clearly stated that Thorne Industries was formed as a general partnership between Harrison Thorne and Taylor Vance. It detailed her initial seed investment of $50,000 and in exchange granted her a non-dilutable 40% equity stake in the company. 40%. She scrolled down to the signature page. There was Harrison's arrogant scrawl, and there was hers, a little hesitant but undeniably her own. She felt a dizzying wave of vindication so powerful it almost buckled her. She wasn't a liability. She wasn't a supportive wife who had been along for the ride. She was a co-founder. She owned nearly half of the entire damn company. The second document she opened was the one that broke her heart all over again. It was titled Corporate Restructure Resolution. PDF dated 2 years later, right after their first major round of venture capital funding. It was a resolution to dissolve the original partnership and reincorporate as a C-Corp, the standard move for a growing tech company. It listed Harrison as the Class A voting shareholder with a 95% stake. It listed her, Taylor Vance, as being issued a small number of common shares amounting to less than 1% in exchange for her previous contributions. Attached to it was a signature page. Harrison's was there, and below it was hers. A perfect digital forgery. She stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. He hadn't just diluted her stake. He had erased her. He had taken her 40% and reduced it to almost nothing, using a forged signature to do it. He had committed blatant, premeditated fraud against his own partner, his own wife, years before Isabella Rossi had ever sat in her chair. This was the why. This was the original sin upon which his entire empire was built. The secret takeover of Innovate Dynamics wasn't a new plan. It was an echo of his first, most successful hostile takeover, the one he had perpetrated against her. He couldn't use Thorne Industries for his new scheme because a deep dive during due diligence might unearth this original fraud. He needed a new clean entity, Argentum, built on a fresh lie funded by a fresh betrayal. Isabella wasn't the architect of his downfall. She was just a partner in his preferred method of business. The man Taylor had married had never really existed. He had been a phantom, a construct, a lie she had helped build and decorate. A profound, chilling calm settled over her. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant hum beneath the surface, but the shock was gone. The game was no longer about winning back a husband or saving a marriage. It was about justice. It was about exposing the ghost in the machine, the lie at the heart of it all. She carefully copied the files onto a secure, encrypted thumb drive. She had her proof. She had her weapon. and now she was going to war. For the next week, Taylor moved with the chilling precision of a bomb disposal expert. Her home was no longer a prison. It was a stage, and she was in the final rehearsals for her closing performance. Every interaction with Harrison was now a data point, every feigned smile a carefully calibrated maneuver. He remained oblivious, consumed by his secret war, convinced his liability was safely handled, cushioned by luxury and impending motherhood. He had no idea the real war was about to be waged in his own boardroom. With Marcus and Chloe, Taylor crafted a meticulous battle plan. Chloe tracked the movements of Argentum Holdings in real time. They were accelerating their purchases of Innovate Dynamics stock, growing bolder as they neared a controlling interest. The takeover was imminent. Marcus, armed with the explosive evidence from the Genesis folder, prepared a legal case so airtight it was a veritable fortress. They weren't just aiming to stop Harrison. They were aiming to dismantle his entire architecture of lies. The chosen battlefield was the quarterly board meeting of Thorn Industries. It was Harrison's arena, his throne room where his power was absolute. To confront him there was to challenge the king in his own court surrounded by his loyalists. It was audacious, bordering on insane, but it was the only venue that would have the immediate cataclysmic impact they needed. Taylor's plan required one more ally. A person on the inside of that boardroom. She chose Arthur Pennington, the oldest member of the board, a stern old money investor who had been a friend of her father's. Arthur was a stickler for ethics and corporate governance, and he had privately expressed concern to Taylor months ago about Harrison's increasingly reckless ambition. He had a reputation for being unshakable. 2 days before the meeting, Taylor met Arthur for tea. She didn't lead with the affair or the emotional betrayal. She laid out the facts as a business case. She presented him with a summarized, heavily redacted brief prepared by Marcus. The formation of Argentum Holdings by an executive officer. The illicit transfer of funds from a marital account containing seed money, the systematic off-the-books purchase of a rival's stock, and the grave legal and financial exposure this represented for Thorn Industries and its shareholders. Arthur read the document, his face growing progressively grimmer. "This is corporate malfeasance on an epic scale," he said, his voice low. "Harrison is acting like a rogue state. Who is the executive officer?" "Isabella Rossi," Taylor said quietly. Arthur nodded slowly as if a missing puzzle piece had just clicked into place. "She was forced on the board by the new venture capital firm. I never trusted her. She has the eyes of a predator." He looked at Taylor, his gaze sharp. "This document mentions marital funds and seed money. This is personal for you, isn't it, my dear?" Taylor met his gaze without flinching. "Arthur, what I am about to show you cannot leave this table until the board meeting. It will not only prove the case, but will redefine the very ownership structure of this company." She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the signature page from the original Thorne-Vance founding partnership agreement. His eyes widened as he saw her name, her signature, and the 40% stake. "My God," he whispered. "You're not the CEO's wife. You're the co-founder." "A co-founder who was systematically defrauded," Taylor said, her voice like ice. "He is building a new empire with my money on a foundation of fraud against me. I am asking you to help me reclaim what is mine and protect the company we both care about from the man who is trying to destroy it." Arthur folded the paper and handed it back, his decision made. "What do you need me to do?" The morning of the board meeting. Taylor dressed with the care of a general preparing for battle. She chose a simple, elegant navy blue maternity dress, a color of authority and calm. She did her hair and makeup with understated perfection. She was not the weeping, hysterical wife. She was Taylor Vance, co-founder. She arrived at Thorn Tower and walked past the receptionist, her bearing so confident that no one dared to stop her. She could feel her son kicking a steady, rhythmic beat as if he were drumming up courage for them both. Marcus was waiting for her in a small conference room down the hall from the main boardroom, the full set of documents in his briefcase. In the boardroom, Harrison was at the head of the table in his element. Isabella Rossi was seated to his right, a picture of cool, untouchable power. The meeting began proceeding through the standard agenda items. Harrison was charismatic, commanding, painting a rosy picture of the company's future. Then Arthur Pennington cleared his throat. Harrison, before we move on to the forward-looking statements, there is a matter of urgent and grave importance that has been brought to my attention regarding a potential breach of fiduciary duty by executive officers. A confused murmur went through the room. Harrison's smile tightened. Arthur, what is this about? If you have a concern, you should have brought it to me privately. I'm afraid this is a matter for the entire board, Arthur said, his voice ringing with authority. He looked towards the door. And for the company's primary and as yet unacknowledged co-founder. On that cue, the boardroom doors opened. Taylor walked in. The silence was absolute. Every head turned. Harrison froze, his face draining of all color. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. Isabella's mask of serene superiority cracked, a flicker of pure fury flashing in her eyes before being replaced by cold calculation. Taylor! Harrison stammered, rising slightly from his chair. What is the meaning of this? This is a private meeting. I believe I have a right to be here, Taylor said, her voice clear and steady, filling the silent room. She walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table from Harrison and stood behind it. As the owner of 40% of this company, she placed a single file folder on the table in front of her. The sound was like a gunshot. What is she talking about? A board member asked. She's confused, Harrison said quickly, trying to regain control. She's not well. She's pregnant, and I have never been more well or more clear in my entire life. Taylor cut him off, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. I have here the original founding partnership agreement for Thorne Industries signed by myself and Harrison Thorne. It grants me a 40% equity stake. I also have the documents from the subsequent incorporation, which includes my forged signature illegally reducing my stake to less than 1%. A fraud upon which this entire company has been operating. She slid a copy of the documents down the long mahogany table. Furthermore, she continued, her voice gaining strength, we have evidence that Mr. Thorne and Ms. Rossi have been operating a shell corporation, Argentum Holdings, funded by $5 million illegally transferred from a joint marital account. They have used this entity to attempt a secret hostile takeover of our chief competitor, Innovate Dynamics, thereby putting this entire company at catastrophic legal and financial risk. She looked directly at Harrison, whose face was now a ghastly shade of gray. You didn't just cheat on me, Harrison. You stole from me. You stole from this company. You stole from our son. Then she turned her ice-cold gaze on Isabella. And you are not a COO. You are a corporate parasite who conspired to commit fraud. I suggest you call your lawyer. The room erupted. It was chaos. Board members were shouting. Harrison was speechless, collapsing back into his chair. Isabella stood up abruptly, her face a mask of cold fury, and walked out of the room without a word. Taylor remained standing, her hand resting on her belly. She had done it. She had walked into the heart of his power and detonated the truth. The coup was complete. But it wasn't her coup, it was his. And she had just exposed it to the world. The boardroom detonation was swift. The board, led by Arthur Pennington, immediately suspended Harrison and terminated Isabella Rossi, who was unceremoniously escorted from the building. As the story of executive overreach broke in the financial press, Thorne Industries' stock plummeted, and the empire built on lies began to crumble. Harrison's attempts to contact Taylor were a pathetic mix of fury and pleading, but she remained unmoved. He was a ghost from a life she no longer recognized. With Marcus as her counsel, Taylor negotiated not a divorce settlement, but a reckoning. Faced with irrefutable proof of fraud and the threat of criminal charges, Harrison capitulated. The original sin was rectified. Taylor's 40% founding stake in Thorne Industries was restored. She wasn't an ex-wife taking a payout. She was a co-founder reclaiming her kingdom. Harrison was left a wealthy exile vanquished from the world he once ruled. Taylor's goal was never to sit on Harrison's throne. She placed her massive block of shares into a trust for her son, took a permanent seat on the board as a guiding guardian, and installed a new CEO. 3 weeks later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy she named Ethan, a name meaning strong. Holding him, a profound peace washed over her. The battles were over. 6 months later, Taylor stood in the living room of a new home, a warm, light-filled brownstone filled with the scent of baby powder and the sound of her son's happy gurgles. She had guided Thorne Industries through its recovery from a distance, hearing only whispers that Harrison had disappeared overseas. She had walked into his office a victim, but emerged a victor. She had been dethroned from a sham marriage only to build a true and powerful throne of her own, one of integrity, strength, and quiet peace. As Ethan's tiny hand wrapped around her finger, she knew this was the only empire that had ever truly mattered. From the ashes of a devastating betrayal, a new strength was forged. Taylor's journey shows us that the deepest wounds can often lead to the most profound discoveries of self-worth and power. It's a reminder that a person's value is never determined by someone else's deception. She didn't just win a divorce. She won back her identity, her legacy, and the right to build a future on her own terms, a future of truth for her son Ethan.